Back when YouTube was still figuring itself out. Think of pixelated videos, random skits, and very chaotic blogs. In my case, I was just a high school student watching things like maybe PewDiePie, watching the typical video games in YouTube. Horror games were a thing back then. So imagine you're back at that time, watching those blogs or videos from your bedroom. It kind of felt like anything could be possible at that point. But fast forward to right now. And while some creators became legends, others kind of faded away. But then there is those stories that took a much darker turn. Welcome back to another Beauty and Crime Sunday with me, in which I do my skincare while we talk about the chilling cases I found this week. And today's case, it's not really about just one content creator. It's about someone who went from anime review and some fan loving to something straight out from a true crime documentary. This is the chilling story of Trey Sesler, aka Mr. Anime, and how a rising YouTube star shattered everything in the most unimaginable way. So buckle up. Today we are heading into a very small town, Texas, specifically Waller County. In the early morning of August 3rd, 1989, a baby boy named Trey Sesler was born to Wanda and Lawton Sesler. He's the youngest of two. His older brother Mark had already arrived a few years earlier, making Trey the baby of the family. Now, on paper, the Seslers were the typical American family. Lawton, the dad, worked at Robinson's elementary school. Super respected, 3 decades in education, but Wanda, the mom, however, was a local newspaper editor, a total wordsmith with a very contagious laugh. The kind of couple that everyone in town knew because it was a very small town. So very respected family. And also they had been married for 34 years. Wow. From the outside, Trey's upbringing seemed normal, pretty average if you think about it. A very quiet house, close-knit family, very small town vibes. Also, he wasn't really a class clown or a rebel. He wasn't bullied and he didn't really stir up any mess. He just kind of blended in, very reserved, very quiet, really nothing out of the ordinary if you looked at him. But inside Trey's head, however, that's where the story takes a little turn. One day, during a chat with the teacher, Trey casually dropped something a little disturbing to the teacher. He said he saw a very suspicious shadow outside his house. I just realized, because I'm dumb, that I did not put the light on, so we're just going to ignore that, and I'm not gonna record again, so we're just gonna act like I had the light the whole time, okay? Okay, let's keep on going. Also, if you didn't realize, I have moved, so sorry if you really hear a lot of noise. I moved from a very small town to the middle of a city, so sorry if it's very noisy. Now, really, let's keep on going. Okay, so Trey said to the teacher that he saw a suspicious shadow, right? A little weird, yes, but then he said that he was going to hide on the woods, across the street, baseball bat in hand, waiting for a police officer to show up, so he could knock him out, steal his gun so he could go to his friend's house and shoot him. So yeah, that's not very normal. And that escalated very quickly. I cannot imagine the teacher's face of like, is he kidding or is he real? But thankfully the plan never really went on. The police got involved very fast and Trey was evaluated by a psychiatrist, and then nothing. No charges, no follow-up, just kind of swept under the rug. Everyone seemed to move on like it was just a weird blip, some kind of teenage fantasy gone wrong. And if you have lived in a small town, this can be things that usually happen there. They just pretend that is not happening and that it's not very serious. So for a while, it did look like that might be true and there was no problems. But as Trey grew into his teen, he started focusing on three big interests: anime, filmmaking, and of course, YouTube. That's why we're talking about this case today. So movies were his escape, his real love, his thing. He was a very creative kid, obsessed with directing short movies, editing and then putting them into a very short film. So when YouTube came along in the mid-2000s, he was like, oh my god, this is my thing. He launched a channel called The Landscape. At first, it was all low-stakes fun. Behind-the-scenes bloopers, short movies, and the occasional appearance from his brother or even his parents sometimes. Just a kid with a camera, some ideas, and a dream. But Trey's online presence, it was only just the beginning. And what it started being as a way of innocent creative expression would eventually spiral into something no one could have ever predicted. So let's talk about Trey's next evolution on YouTube and where things really started to take off for him. In addition to loving filmmaking, Trey was also deeply into anime, the dramatic, the colorful, and often intense world of Japanese animation. And by the late 2000s, anime was really starting to gain serious momentum online. So Trey did see an opportunity and decided to make a pivot. He launched a new brand channel, Mr. Anime, fitting his new personality and fan base for anime. And yep, he completely leaned into his new personality, and he would often start his videos by saying hello, which he said in his distinctive tone that many of his fans ended up quickly recognizing him for. This channel would be home for anime reviews, breakdowns of series and movies, and eventually even video commentary. And Trey's style, it was, well, brutally honest, very straightforward, and very unapologetically opinionated. He didn't really sugarcoat his takes, no, he was like, no cap. But fans started loving his directness about everything, and it made him really stand out from all the other YouTube creators that were just trying to find his voice. So by 2011, Mr. Anime was blowing up. Over 1 million views in just 1 year. And keep in mind, back then, that was not very normal. 1 million views mattered. It was enough to really start building a very loyal fan base. Enough to turn a hobby into something he could really work with. So between 2006 and 2011, Trey was all in. He poured countless hours into scripting, filming, editing, everything. He did review anime. He ranted about different games. He even made short films, some of which were a little goofy, and others were more unsettling than he probably intended. But let's not forget, Trey's first love was filmmaking. And once he had an audience for it, he started sharing more of his experimental stuff. Homegrown action shorts, fake weapon demos, and dramatized kill scenes that blended the special effects with his love for killing scenes. At first, they did seem like harmless to everyone, but in hindsight, they may have hinted into a weird direction that Trey was going for. Because while Mr. Anime was gaining fans and growing a community online, things that were a little darker were behind the scenes. Even as Trey's audience grew, something darker started creeping into his content. Back then, YouTube wasn't very strict about firearms. I feel like right now you get demonetized or your video will be taken out for saying anything. But back then, you could basically say whatever you wanted and it was fine. In fact, gun-related stuff was everywhere on YouTube. Reviews, demos, even firing range videos were a thing back then. And Trey, well, he did lean into that very hardly. He started mixing his anime and game reviews with gun runs, talking about his biggest collection, showing off different weapons that he bought. One video specifically raised some eyebrows on people. In it, he rambled about the state of the economy, job losses, and how anyone could be a victim in a very violent incident. He looked straight at the camera and he said, "You think it won't happen to you, but sometimes it does, especially nowadays. There is always another one."
So, I don't know what's going on. They had an article that were like, well, the economy's gone bad. Everyone's losing their job and getting mad and shooting everybody. Yeah, I guess that makes sense since a lot of the shooters lately had recently lost their job. But I'm a firearms owner myself, but it is a little bit disturbing to know that you could be a victim in something like this at these times. All the people that were victims, you think it won't happen to me, but sometimes it does. But seriously, every day I open Yahoo, I'm like, well, time to see what today's shooting is, and hey, there's another one.
It was the kind of comment that didn't really sit right with people. Viewers weren't just confused about it, they were very concerned. On the surface, life still seemed functional for Trey. He was making videos, gaining different subscribers, and interacting with different fans. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling very fast. By the early 2000s, Trey had developed an unhealthy fixation on mass shootings, particularly the Columbine shooters, and he isolated himself more and more, withdrawing from different friends and his online community. And while it's impossible to say exactly what triggered it, he began quietly planning something unthinkable. He did download satellite maps of the Waller High School, his former school, and according to later investigations, Trey was seriously considering an attack and had even created plans to carry it out. Then rumors started to spread online. People said he'd been using live animals as a target practice, including, heartbreakingly, his own pet rabbits. While not all of this was confirmed, it painted a terrifying picture of where Trey's mind was at. Over time, his videos also started to change dramatically. Once sharp, passionate, and confused, they became erratic and harder to follow. He would still do reviews and intros about different animes or different movies that he saw, but the energy was off. It was like the spark that he once had that made Mr. Anime unique was gone. "Hey everyone, it's Mr. Anime, the guy with the guns." That's how he would open some of his videos.
It's Mr. Anime. Or you can call me Trey. You can call me the guy that does the video game reviews, and you can call me the guy that does all the gun stuff now. What I have here today to show you is a High Point. For those of you that are familiar with High Point, you might have a very low opinion of them, or you might have a high opinion of them.
Disjointed, off balance, basically he looks tired. And then there was the different situation back at home. By the late 2000s, Trey's relationship with his father was crumbling a little bit. Around Christmas, he confided in a friend that he was planning to kill him, which is something, if you were the friend, you would be a little worried about and probably had told someone, but okay. But Trey said that his father said that he basically had given up on him, that he thought that Trey was very unstable, a disappointment, someone who would never amount to anything. Whether that was really true or Trey perceived it like that, the damage in his brain was already done. He was no longer the quiet kid making anime videos in his bedroom. No, he was becoming something much different. Trey's unraveling mental state wasn't really just playing out online. No, it had reached his home life too, as 2011 turned into 2012. Tensions inside the Sesler house were very high. Trey had moved in with his grandfather, probably trying to put some space in between him and his closest family. But even with the space, the arguments continued between his family, especially with his brother and dad. The fights were often about the same exact thing. Trey's reliance on alcohol, his lack of direction in life, and the belief, specifically in Trey's mind, that his family saw him as a failure, useless and broken. That perception, especially from his father, seemed to take roots in Trey's thoughts. Whether it was real or imagined, we will never really know, but we know that it began to define him. Then came, at that moment, a thing that sounded like a good thing. On March 13, 2012, Trey uploaded his 323rd video to YouTube. It was titled "Mr. Anime is Getting a New Job." In it, Trey shared that he had gotten a new job offer and that he would probably take a while with the videos and he would take priority on his job, so the uploads on the videos would probably be less. But that he was very excited for this new opportunity. So most of the fans, they were just happy for him. But he said, "Don't worry, I'll still be around, just uploading a little less." It seemed like things were looking up for him, but the truth was far darker. That video, lighthearted and very optimistic, would be the last one Trey ever uploaded to YouTube. So in the early hours of March 20, 2012, Trey had been binge drinking alone, isolated, spiraling. He waited until everyone in his house was asleep. Then just before sunrise, he walked back in the suburban family home, fully armed. His mother, his father, and his brother had no idea what was coming for them. What happened next was brutal and very senseless. Later that day, police were called to the Sesler residence after concerned relatives reported that no one had answered their calls. At first, nothing seemed like out of the ordinary, but then officers looked through the windows and the scene inside the house looked like a horror scene. The house was wrecked, rifle casings littered the floor, furniture destroyed, glass shattered in nearly every room, and then there were the walls. They were handwritten confessions. Trey's last desperate attempts to explain what he had basically done. "Why did I do this? I love my mom and dad and brother. God forgive me because I can't forgive myself." Inside, police found all 3 family members dead. Each one had been shot on the head, but Trey had vanished. He wasn't there. So what no one knew at that time was that after the killings, Trey had loaded his car with over 100 rounds of ammunition, along with his rifle, and he drove to Waller High School, the one that I said before, the one that he had plans to, the school where he once walked the halls as a quiet, awkward teenager. He did park his car outside and just sat there for hours. Was he preparing for a mass shooting or just hesitating or thinking maybe of what he just did? I guess we will never know. But in the end, he didn't really go through with it, thank God. But later that night, police tracked him down at a nearby address and basically placed him into arrest. It didn't really take long for him to confess because he already had all the confessions on the wall, so he admitted to everything, one officer said. The murders, the plan, all of it. Trey Sesler, Mr. Anime, told investigators that he had planned to shoot up the Waller High School with the target of basically killing just 70 people. The only reason he murdered his family first, he claimed, was that so they wouldn't have to endure the shame and the pain of what was about to do. But in the end, his plan failed. But not before 3 innocent people were taken, and the once beloved figure of the anime YouTube scene had turned into something unimaginable. What makes this case even more horrifying is what Trey said after his arrest. During interviews with investigators, he opened up in a way that many were left shaking. He claimed that instantly when he shot his mom, he felt regret, but in his mind it was already too late. I just couldn't leave my brother behind after that, he admitted, and my dad, it had to be done. They would have been devastated. He convinced himself that by killing them, he was sparing them from shame or pain. It was a very twisted logic, yes, cold and deeply very broken, but something shifted once he arrived to the Waller High School. He just sat there, parked outside the building in his car, where he once had been that quiet boy walking through the halls in this high school, and it all came in straight into him, all the weight, and he said it just felt too real. That was my chance. I don't know. Maybe this is just what happens. In the end, Trey Sesler never fired a shot at the school. He was arrested later that night and basically was charged for 3 counts of capital murder. In the court, there was no trial, no long defense. Trey pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There were later rumors online that Trey had died in prison, but these were false. As of today, Trey Sesler is still alive and serving his sentence behind bars, and he always will be. Those who knew Trey were stunned, both online and in real life. Yes, he had a fascination with violence, but it had always been through the lens of different video games or different movies, series. He did come across as smart, a little awkward, but just smart. But dangerous, no one really thought he would be dangerous. He had friends, a fan base, and a future. At least it really did look like he had those. And then it all collapsed in the most horrifying way. The truth is, it's easy to forget how horrifying this case could have been. The loss of his family was tragic, senseless, and irreversible. But the mass shooting he had planned, that was much worse. And imagine the whole plan had gone through. That could have devastated the whole community. Trey's family did die for nothing. No message, no legacy, and no cause. Just silence and destruction. In the wake of a boy that just had been consumed by darkness. And while that was the case of Trey Sesler, a once beloved YouTuber that turned to kill his family. A tragic reminder that the darkest stories sometimes hide behind the most familiar scenes, or the most normal family you could think of. If this case had shocked you like it did to me, or made you really reflect, let me know down in the comments. I always love hearing your opinions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that jazz, so you never miss another Beauty and Crime Sunday with me. So stay curious, stay cautious, and above it all, stay safe out there. Until next time, and remember, do your skincare. And if you don't end up like a glazed donut at the end of it, you're not doing it right. Bye bye.